Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us again. Allow me to welcome our next speaker for the next session for day two. Hazmi Yusof, the Managing Director of Frost and Sullivan GIC Malaysia, Sdn Berhad, to shed some light on the trends and drivers shaping digital ASEAN. Over to you, Hazmi.
Thank you very much, Hasrul. Very good morning. Assalamualaikum. Hope you guys are all fresh from the day. Exciting sessions that we had previously yesterday. So I'm also looking forward for the next few days in this session. Firstly, MDEC, thank you for inviting me. It is a pleasure to be here. I just want to start by basically perhaps introducing Frost and Sullivan. We are a research and advisory company. This month, in fact, we are 60 years old, so we are quite an old research company. And funny thing is, in the beginning, most of our clients were from the military because the only entities that were looking to understand technology was actually the military. So moving forward 60 years on, it is all the biggest users of technology intelligence businesses. So I just want to start by breaking down my session. I had 1 hour. We started a little bit late. I'll try to finish the whole session by 11 o'clock. But just to give you a broad view, I'm breaking down my sessions into 4. First is to look at what is the consumer perception on their wish and their attitude to post this pandemic. So we did a survey in 2020, a global survey, especially here in ASEAN, in Malaysia and Southeast Asia, to gauge the consumer perception and the mindset behind what happens moving forward. Second, I'm going to cover a few transformational mega trends to give us a context of what are we looking at from a more macro perspective in ASEAN moving forward. Thirdly, I'm going to cover 2 very interesting technology which we feel in Frost is one of those enabling technology moving forward, key technologies moving forward. I promise you we're not going to cover or we are going to limit ourselves from using the word AI, machine learning, that sort of thing, because I think it's been spoken to death kind of thing. And fourthly, I want to talk about something which is rarely talked about, which is digitally driven business model. So essentially, these are the 4 parts of my presentation. So let me move on to the first part, which is the consumer behavior trends post-COVID. Post-COVID, basically the survey that we did sometime 3rd quarter in 2020. So I'm very happy to share some insights on the survey that we've done. I think basically what happened is that the COVID-19 has impacted, as you well know, the way we work, the way we make purchases, the way we spend our free time. And I think it has also compelled consumers, you and I, to interact more with technology, whether we like it or not. And we see that there is a big growth in terms of work wearables, which has gone into the consumer space. Something that you just considered for work, which may be limited, is now in the consumer space. So that's very interesting shift moving forward. So if you look at this slide that I have, you look at the internet users aged 16 to 64. These are one of the key behaviors that you're looking at in terms of we also realized, very interesting enough, that the segment that has not really leveraged or used or utilized technology, i.e. people 60 and above, are now moving into that space and embracing more technology. I will give you an example. My own mother, who has probably have not even turn on the computer are now going into the digital device to look at things like some online purchases as well. So it has changed a lot of people's attitude in terms of the consumer behavior. When you look at e-commerce, it has grown in leaps and bounds in terms of number one, the different channels that has kind of cropped up, and different channels cater for different types of users and age demographic. And so if you look at areas like, I'll give you an example, Instagram. The younger people are using Instagram to purchase things online, for example. So this has kind of transformed people's attitude, people's preference towards purchasing or acquiring services, for that matter. Next slide is interesting in the sense that today you see that there is a complete consumer behavior shift from home to work to leisure, health, and mobility. I take examples of brand loyalty today. People from our research, people are less particular about the brand, but more focused on where do they get it from. So whether it's purchased through Shopee or it's purchased through Facebook, a marketplace, that has a different connotation than looking at the brand per se. And you look at in terms of health, you look at the fourth column there, health. Gamification in terms of wellness, has been around, but has taken to the next level during this pandemic. I think many of you probably have Strava to monitor in terms of the number of hours you exercise, the calories that you burn, and so on. And this has a more social angle to it in a way that you're comparing your friends, your peers are looking at your activities and so on. And if you look at mobility as well, we are seeing a lot of changes. If you look at the cars, mainstream cars, that has been rolled out in the last 2 years, we see more and more cars, mainstream cars, going for Proton today has a SIM card attached to it, has data attached to it. Peru have their so-called SmartLink. So connected cars are no longer reserved for the expensive cars like the BMWs and the Bentleys and so on. It is gone mainstream for various reasons. Going to the next slide, you see that today, you and I, we expect personalization in our customer experience journey. I think Google, in some ways, have kind of spoiled us somewhat. When we do a quick search, we get a bit annoyed when the search has not the search does not complete our typing, for example. Everything has become a bit more intuitive moving forward. And I have, for example, personally spoken to many chatbots during this MCO, especially the logistics company. But hey, I don't mind that anymore. Before, I used to be thinking, why am I talking to a chatbot? Today, it is fairly accepted by myself. And when we did the survey, this is shared by many consumers. People are accepting of chatbot in today's times. So moving forward, I think the level of personalization will be more granular, will be more intelligent moving forward. And this is important in terms of how companies differentiate themselves, how companies make themselves more competitive moving forward. If you look at the typical retail experience from end to end, companies are already out there. I just want to go into one example is Caper, where they have embedded an AI into the shopping cart and they would have a digital assistant supporting it moving forward. And these are the kind of technology that in the past has been very exclusive to high-end retail, but today it is in the grocery space. And I have no doubt that this shift is going very much into the ASEAN market as well. You have companies like Picnic on your far right that basically automates the entire food production line, so that there is no human involved in the preparation. And what is significant why we put it in the slide is that this is not a multi-million-dollar machine. This machine is something that a restaurant outlet would purchase it. So the entry to market for this kind of technology is no longer the high end. So if you look at in terms of how will this influence retail? Number one, today you have influencers that carries more weight than brands, established brand, for example. So you have people like Nilofa, actually I don't know any influencer that command a certain following. So if Nilofa were to have a cup of coffee like this, and it's a certain brand, that carries a more marketing impact than, say, another channel, for example. So this has shifted a lot of the playing field in terms of consumer brands. You look at brand value today, people brand loyalty now looks at brand value. So if a brand, for example, has either it's eco-friendly or it's sustainable, it positions itself as I'm planting trees for my sustainability, that carries a bigger brand loyalty than the other aspects of it. And of course, we look at digital commerce today. It is it is all over the place. There's so many platforms out there serving different customer needs. Again, this is something that we think is only kind of focused in Asia, but this is the global thing where price sensitive and local purchasing is top of the consumer mind when it comes to buying, when it comes to purchasing. That's quite an interesting kind of paradox to it. Perhaps being able to compare prices without much effort, kind of shape the consumer's mindset in that sense. So when you look at the other part, the other component I want to talk about, which is quite interesting, is the importance of mobility in the survey that we've done. So today, when you look at cars, the biggest segment that is buying cars moving forward is the Gen Z. And for companies that is planning their products, planning the packaging of the products, the understanding of Gen Z is probably one of the key thought process that you have to implement. The other thing I think is quite interesting from a vehicle mobility standpoint is today vehicles are slowly converging with health and wellness, and there will be a lot more features added to the car where it will be able to measure perhaps your heart rate, perhaps certain model will be able to look at even your blood pressure or your oxygen level and so on. Maybe even your weight, for example, your overweight, and it will give you a sound of. These are very much shaped in terms of how consumers perceive cars today. It's no longer the likes of myself. I'm a Gen X who looks at cars and value cars maybe based on liability, for example. So today's consumers are really focused on feature that in a way enriches them. Then move on to the next slide. I will try to speed up. I think I've talked about 10-15 minutes. We do have about 35 minutes left. So let me just try to push move the slide faster. I think one of the interesting things from this survey that we did was that there's a lot of focus on and awareness from consumers in Asia, Southeast Asia especially, in terms of the importance of sustainable environment, how does the urban areas that we live in, how do they maximize capacity, what's the resilience in terms of managing a disaster or a crisis. That has been more top of mind when it comes to the consumers today. And they are willing to share more of their data with the city council, with the government bodies, but expecting a certain level of transparency when it comes to how this data is managed. And people are also looking at new mobility solutions when it comes to the last mile. So the attitude towards cycling, walking, public transport has shifted, are more favorable than, say, the surveys that we did in the last years. And today, the theme of transit-oriented development, which was kind of a big thing maybe 2015, which kind of integrate work, live, and play, and probably education into one area, is back into their thinking. People does not want to spend 90 minutes every morning to go to work, and maybe another 90 minutes to come back. I think the COVID-19 and work from home has kind of changed the attitude of most consumers. So if you go, let me go into the next part of this, which is part of my presentation, which is one of the transformational mega trends. So one of the mega trends that we talk about is that smart technology or smart application is now the new green. Now, what do I mean by that? When you look at smart city, for example, today the thinking is no longer behind what are the fancy technologies out there to drive change. What are the even in terms of recycling? What can be recycled today? It's more towards we have a certain amount of capacity. How do we maximize this capacity? So this is something where smart cities, especially across Asia, is now thinking about. When smart cities started not too long ago, maybe 10 years ago, it was all about technology, sensors, and most probably the hype of it. But today is how do we use technology to maximize capacity? So there are many different models that cities are now employing to make sure that this capacity, the resources are maximized. Second is, let me put on this next. Second is there are more and more thinking behind circular economy moving forward, and I think this will change a lot of how products are being designed, products are being sold. In fact, so today it is still primarily around plastics, as you can see in the slides. And when you look at Asia Pacific, we are probably one of the highest in terms of packaging that is consumed and not recycled. So this is one of the areas that we see that it's going to be an area of focus moving forward. And but behind this thinking is that circular economy is about extending the life cycle of a product. So a consumer would buy, let's say, food. The consumer will no longer wish to have something that is air flown on the other side of the world. They rather focus on eating something that is local and also in season. And this is something which I think started off in Europe. I think the Japanese people have been using this approach for a very long time, but it is moving towards this part of the world in terms of how do we look at the life cycle of any product when it comes to whether we share that product, we reuse that product, we repair that product, we refurbish that product, we recycle the materials, and so on. So that is, I would say that one of the key focus areas when addressing a product, whether it's even digitally driven products and the more conventional products. The other mega trend that I want to talk to you about is smart retail. And COVID-19 has changed in terms of the way retail have been perceived. So that number one is, when you look at the footprint, we expected the footprint of retail from big mega shops like Tesco's, for example, to a pop-up size where it can be established anywhere quickly, and then can even be turned off and move on to another location. And we see that being quite an interesting phenomenon, in the sense that the big supermarkets have invested heavily in terms of retail space, and this has really kind of disrupted those return on investment, because today consumers prefer to purchase their goods in their local neighborhood. There is a combination between retail and online, physical and online, in terms of their requirement. So that has kind of disrupted the retail space quite a fair bit. And why I kind of put this up is because in Southeast Asia, we have as a region have invested a lot in malls, and this has kind of changed how more would pull consumers or foot traffic to come back post COVID-19. So when you look at typically the in-store experience with digital assistants, as I mentioned before, smart AI trolleys and augmented realities, this will be key in terms of creating the customer or user experience to compete and support the online experience. So for let's say a retail space that doesn't have all this in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll find that the foot traffic will drop kind of like significantly. And of course, you see in the last 2 years the growth of online hypermarkets, where people purchase almost anything under the sun through this platform. Again, this has changed in terms of how a company or an organization roll out and distribute its products. The entry in terms of going into the market is a lot lower than before. If you have a good product, you would have a better access to the market than, let's say, in the last 2 to 3 years. And this has kind of shifted the players, the retail players, and the products in the market today. Let me go quickly to the next slide. So I think one of the things that I want to talk about is also the social trends. I think very much in particular, the Generation Z and Generation Y, mainly because Southeast Asia has one of the younger population in this world. Together with Latin America, this region is one of the youngest population within the globe. So it's important to understand this shift in trends because this has a kind of direct impact in terms of our target market moving forward, especially in Southeast Asia. So if you look at the slides here, you can see that in this region, the dominant population is the Gen Y and the Gen Z, and this segment of the demographic will have have their own approach in terms of how they would like to experience certain products, in terms of how they go about procuring things, and what in terms of their work habits, all these are fairly, different than, say, people like myself, which is the Gen X. So it's important for any businesses to understand the Gen Y and the Gen Z mindset, especially in Southeast Asia, because although this is one region, it is a very complex region in terms of the geopolitical, in terms of the culture and the religion and so on. This is a fairly complex ecosystem, to say the least. When you look at, interesting enough, is that when you look at the other component here is the rise of the middle class, and when you look at when you look at the middle class population, 65% of the global middle class population in 2030 will be residing in Asia, and that has a lot of impact in terms of how companies or how businesses position its products and services. Typical of any middle class population looks at with a lot of importance in terms of education, in terms of insurance, in terms of savings, in terms of recreational activities, in terms of tourism. And Southeast Asia has one of the most highest percentage of the middle class population, especially in Asia Pacific as well. So it is interesting to see in the next few years the kind of product positioning and segmentation to cater for this growing middle class in this region. For example, the kind of tourist products that we put across, that we roll out, cater perhaps more for the Asian middle class. We kind of like position a lot of tourism with the West. Now we have to maybe look at what Asians want to see, want to experience moving forward. It has a big impact in terms of the consumption and the consumer consumption as well. So let me move on to the next one in my segment. So I've covered the consumer survey. I've covered a bit of transformational megatrends. I want to cover two components, which is basically first one is data marketplace. So this next two components I will talk about is basically on technology. What kind of technology that would have an impact or drive an impact to the digital ASEAN market? And one of the technologies that we identified is data marketplace. So today, for example, data that's being generated is about 2.5. This is a tongue twister. Quintillion bytes per day, and what we have generated today is like 90% of the data we generated in the last 2 years. So we can see that the graph of data, of growth, of amount of data generated is like a non-linear graph moving forward. So we see that data marketplaces have an immense potential to create new revenue streams and by productizing these data assets. So let me just go through firstly, and what is data marketplace? So if you look at the data marketplace, let's talk about what is data marketplace. So it is a platform that kind of collates, kind of unifies different data that we have in different places. Today, many companies, organizations, even city councils and so on, struggles in terms of number one, generating the data, number two, managing the data, because this kind of things is not it is an expensive activity. It's also time consuming. So we see that the advent of data marketplace allows organization that does not have the budget or inclination to manage the data that they generate to pass to a platform which will do all that for them in a kind of like a win-win situation. So when you look at the types of data marketplace, number one is personal data, of course, data of you and I. Number two is the business data that's being generated. And number three, of course, is the IoT sensor data marketplaces, where volumes of data is generated, and usually it's called big data in that sense. Although one of the challenges that we always have is that there are the issue of privacy, in terms of how the data is being generated, how the data is being basically distributed. And it doesn't help that in the past there are many scandals like the Cambridge Analytica scandal with Facebook, and also I think the GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation, by the EU has kind of emphasized in terms of this being a very has to be a very secure and well managed platform. But even then, put all that into consideration, it will still drive the growth of this new currency, new revenue, which is generating, trading, analyzing data moving forward. Let me just go to the next slide. So when you look at, let's look at Asia Pacific Index in this sense. In terms of how strict the data protection laws is, in terms of government data acquisition, sharing, utilizing data, it is still not as rigid, not as tight as the rules in Europe and North America. But I think one of the things that we will see moving forward is that Asia Pacific, maybe even ASEAN, I would say ASEAN, and maybe even at the country level, there will be a one unified policy mechanism to make sure that there is a bit more structure in terms of how data is being managed and being distributed in that sense. So I'm going to move to the next slide. So this has a lot of implication in terms of businesses when we talk about this availability of data. And when you look at the typically, the first thing that you think about is that, okay, this data is very much going to be used for marketing, for consumer or customer intelligence. But you look at this slide that I presented here in terms of its application, you see that there is a lot more, there's more variety in terms of how this data is being applied. So organization wants this kind of data to improve their operations, for example, to understand how to improve efficiency as another thing. So it's just not a pure commercial requirement for this data. It cuts across different tangent of how the data is applied. And even government for today would leverage this kind of data in terms of how to improve, how to update or create new policies moving forward. So if you look at how important it is, we look at today, it is very much on how do we leverage this data moving forward. As I mentioned earlier, Southeast Asia is quite a geopolitically and culturally diverse region. So data is seen as key in terms of how to unlock the Southeast Asia, market or single market to that extent. So companies that looks to invest in this region actually looks at what kind of a data ecosystem is there available for them to come in and invest in this region. So a region that has a very strong ecosystem when it comes to this kind of data, will be able to attract investors, whether it's domestic investors, whether it's foreign investors to this particular country or region. So today, as we speak, there are many smart city authorities around Southeast Asia that's already building up this data platform. And we predict that these smart city authorities would move to a more commercial offering of this data moving forward. I'll give you a good example. Jakarta Smart City Authorities uses this data in the form of, we have a smart card that allows for them to track in terms of some of the subsidies that they bring up to the civil servants, which is a big, large group in Jakarta, big, large population in Jakarta. And they have some subsidies for civil servants when it comes to things like rice, sugar, flour, and using this card, the civil servants are being able to buy things at a more discounted price. But at the same time, the Jakarta Smart City uses this to manage in terms of pricing, in terms of inflation, whenever there is a subsidy involved. So it's also used as managing subsidies moving forward. And it's already happening in places like Jakarta today. So when you look at this, I wanted to include this slide just to give you a kind of like a picture in terms of how big will this data marketplaces be. We are looking at something around a 12% compound annual growth rate, and data volume is forecasted to be 10x in 2020 to 2025. So it's quite a large growth in that sense, despite the issue of security, the issue of privacy. We are predicting that data marketplace will grow on an annual growth rate of 12%. Next slide. So these are some use cases I just want to show you. So for you to give to have an understanding, because it is still a fairly new thing here in Southeast Asia, Asia Pacific for that matter. One interesting use case is a company called Quandl. And Quandl today, 10 of the largest hedge funds in the world, 8 of them are actually using Quandl in terms of subscribing to this kind of data, in terms of putting together their economic, financial forecasting for these hedge funds. So let me move on. I'm looking at the time, I'm quickly running out of time. To my next, and this is, I think, the most exciting thing I have seen in the last 15 years. And I think this is going to change a lot of for me, I think this is a game changer. It's the digital identity management market. So what is digital identity management, for example? Let me just go on to the next slide. So digital identity essentially is a personal data that you get online that can be traced back to the real you. So that's basically digital identity. And a digital identity system, it compiles your personal information such as your name, IC number, passport number, healthcare, life insurance, financial details, and kind of link it to a secure digital device or account in the cloud. I think one thing is interesting, and I was reading the MDEX chairman tweet, I think not too long ago, last month, talking about how digital ID will help us a lot when it comes to managing, first of all, our subsidies, how it's being deployed, vaccination passport, and so on. And digital ID is something that many nations are there. are kind of like racing to roll out, and you can see in my next few slides, it's almost like a race to roll out the population. Let me go to the next slide. So where are we in terms of digital identity management? So we are about on the phase 3, which is very user-centric identity. But moving forward, you see that a digital identity management will have the controls purely reside on the user itself. So I'll give you a good example is our national ID card. National ID card is the next generation of our national ID card would have all our information tied or into the card, and the card would be somewhat of your personal cloud, right? So all your data that you have in terms of your movement, in terms of your spending, in terms of your buying habits, in terms of health, in terms of whatever consumption will be analyzed, will be managed by this digital identity management, and all this analyzed data will sit on your national ID card. And the national ID card will probably have a biometric sensor on it so that you are able to authenticate all this data that is being input and output to the cloud and so on. So without a biometric enablement, it is hard to make sure that wherever that person is. So moving forward, I think you see that every region in the world is kind of like looking at some form of adoption of this digital ID. Digital ID has in terms of its impact, has a huge benefit. As you can see earlier, there are many ways in terms of how once a consumer manages its own data and it has some kind of AI and machine learning tied to it, is able to manage their own activities. It's almost like having a personal digital assistant in that sense. And a lot of the inputs that is given back to the user is based on data. So let me go to the next slide. So today, of course, when you look at digital ID, Estonia was among the first adopters, you can see here, and 99% of the population has one. In fact, if you go to Estonia, they will probably give you a digital ID tag, and you're able to move around Estonia, using that digital ID. Even Philippines have started with their own digital ID, and unfortunately, I think that particular project has been put on hold because of COVID, perhaps the budget issues and so on. But what I wanted to say here is that digital ID is, it has all the governments have a kind of like focus on it, and everyone's trying to be the first or to be among the first to roll it out, due to its the impact that it has to its population. So in essence, if you have where does it focuses on in terms of when you have that digital identity management, in terms of financial services, you would be able to have a safe digital banking, for example, and digital banking will, again, I think for a region that has about 55% banking penetration, this has this is quite a game changer in that sense. In terms of governance, is another thing. Today, whether it's Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, the region, government struggles in terms of having the right, the latest data, especially for its population, and having a digital identity management each individual is able to share their own data for the government to make better policies, better investment, and so on. Entertainment is going to be big because with digital identity management, entertainment, the companies such as Netflix and so on is able to target you much better. There will be a lot more personal kind of packages for you. In terms of retail, there's no doubt about it. So there are many pockets which would enable better services, better offering once a digital identity management ecosystem is built. So I just want to give you an example of the one I took from MCMC. So Malaysia also have their own digital ID plans, and so here, I think not just Malaysia but all the countries in the world, one of the biggest challenges today is what is the form factor for the ID? So the most logical form factor for the ID is actually using our national identity card as a form factor. It's paired with a mobile phone for its dashboard-like engagement. And this is what MCMC has looked at and has partitioned in that sense in terms of what can the application be when Malaysia rolls out its national digital identity. So you can see here, I'm not sure whether it's blurred on your end, but it covers quite a broad range of application, from healthcare to e-commerce to education and so on. And I think this is one of the platform that would allow a more level playing field for the population. Just like how IT has made business a bit more level playing field, meaning a company can start up its business without having to buy servers, without having to even to have their own offices. It's the same with this. It will kind of like flatten the level playing field a little bit more for everybody across the board. And I think that's the most impactful thing about this digital identity and the personal data it creates moving forward. Let me see. So I would like to move to my last part of the presentation. I have 12 more minutes before I end, so I will kind of like speed up. So this is the last part of my session. So let me start with what are the driving factors pushing this digitally driven new business models. So you can see here that there are many influences in terms of why the new business model is getting more and more important for companies, for governments alike. And I would probably say that in short, we already live in this kind of like connected, complex, paradoxical, diverse, competitive ecosystem environment, and a new business model in terms of one of the areas we look at is customization, it is pay as you go and so on, kind of create that kind of added competition to the whole fall. So one of the things that we what are the key digitally driven business models out there? And you can see here I've kind of have the top 6. So you have the gig economy, sharing economy, on demand, crowdsourcing, anything as a service, freemium. These are what we see as those key business models moving forward, where in which the companies, more and more companies today, when they put across their products and product planning, are looking at adopting this business model to their services, to their products moving forward. So let me start with the sharing economy. I think the sharing economy is probably a big game changer when it comes to emerging markets. like a lot of in Asia Pacific, Southeast Asia particularly, it allows people to have access to capacity. It allows people to have access to an OPEX model rather than a CAPEX model. Again, giving access to the have-nots to have access where it's very much default exclusive for the more well-to-do. I think this opens up a lot of opportunities, not just in the urban area, but also in the non-urban area. So we see that typically we have the ride share, the Airbnb, in the last 5-8 years. But you see that more and more services surrounding the sharing economy is going to further disrupt the space. So, for example, if you're a farmer and you don't have the right volume, let's say, but purchase a tractor, buying a tractor together with the other farmers who you don't even know, and we're actually sharing those resources is one of those areas that's already happening in places like the Philippines, which is I find that quite interesting. So in that sense, we are moving towards a more kind of like equitable playing field as we move forward. I like to give it, for example, China in I think 2015 or 2016 have rolled out a national priority when it comes to sharing and crowdsourcing business model to become like a national agenda for them. And it has really kind of opened up a different level of capacity, different level of access to capacity, maximizing capacity, and so on. And achieve economies of scale, where if you don't have this kind of model, it will be a lot more difficult to justify scale, for example. I'd like to give an example of Gojek. So Gojek, through its sharing economy platform, have allowed people to first of all, from starting from being a Gojek driver or one that rides the motorbike, to also become electrician, become aircon service, provide aircon service to household, to even plumbing and so on, and all through a platform which goes beyond just driving or taking a motorbike from A to B. So it has grown in terms of the kind of application as time goes on, and it's interesting to see that this enables employment much better in the urban cities in Indonesia, for example. It allows more access to opportunities to earn money and so on. And I think the skill level will only go up and up and up when it comes to this kind of services platform. The other thing that we look, it's good to look at in terms of is crowdsourcing, and crowdsourcing is becoming a model of choice, so to speak, for businesses that want to have a social impact. And you can see that in the last 2 years during COVID, that there's a lot more social entrepreneurship happening. There's a lot more impact investment. Impact investment means investment that is just beyond just the dollars and return on investment. There's a more social impact when it comes to investing and so on. So crowdsourcing is one of the go-to choice model for businesses that's looking at creating a social impact. And I think you see this going, something that will go bigger and bigger as we move on towards decentralization. And you see that the figure here is that even though it is like a social entrepreneurship, you look at the actual size of the market is growing in terms of quite drastically. From look at it in 2018, it's only $5 billion in size, but during this pandemic, has kind of pushed that projection to by 2025 will be 93 billion. So it is not just a social entrepreneurship platform, but also a real business platform. The third thing I want to talk about is personalization and customization. So today, as I mentioned earlier, consumers demand personalization and customization. And I think the granularity of that demand will just get more and more as we move along. And it's important to understand that for government especially, the infrastructure in order is important in terms of achieving that. For example, when a country has the right data ecosystem, the right data exchanges, achieving personalization and customization is a lot more easier to achieve. It is a lot more competitive to achieve. So it's important that to understand that the younger generation that would specific people like me would have that kind of wish and wants to be having things that's personalized and customized both from a product standpoint and also from a service standpoint. So let me just move to the next slide. I think this is another business model which kind of started probably not too long ago. I think a good example of this value to many is Air Asia is one of good example of this. But it really appeals to the middle class of Southeast Asia is ever growing. And we have an example here of Xiaomi as a electronic phone manufacturer. So they went into this position where it is a value to many proposition, and no different than Air Asia, for example. And you can see that Xiaomi's market size and growth has grown leaps and bounds. I think value for many in the next 3 to 5 years will be a key business model to a lot of companies moving forward. Especially when COVID has really shaken up things like how customers perceive price and value. So the next one I will talk about, I'm going to run out of time soon, so I will hurry up here. This is, I think, it is many clients of mine wanting to go into a certain market looks at this in a very very detailed, very rigorous way in terms of how you make your product evolution to be from a product a service, from not just from a service but pay as you go on demand, and from on demand to a subscription-based service. So a good example that if you ask Apple, and you ask them about their iPhone, for example, they would rather have iPhone. They don't want to sell iPhones in that way. They would want to have iPhone sold in a subscription service. So when you move your client from selling ad hoc a product to a subscription service, you're looking at a much reduced marketing cost. You're looking at being able to add different kind of services or value add where the margins are on top of your key products. You're able to look at whether a product is profitable or not with good data in a very short period of time. But I think most probably is that the predictability of your products or your service is achieved through a more of a subscription business. So today, a lot of companies looking at this in a very serious way. How do I move my product to become a service, to become on demand, or to become a subscription-based service moving forward? And last but not least, I think this is one of the last ones I have, is the freemium model. And I think it is actually a business model that is picking up in terms of its popularity in companies because of access to data. So if you look at what is a freemium, let me just go back to the definition. So freemium means like your LinkedIn and your Spotify. The basic services are given out free of charge, no cost whatsoever. So you go into LinkedIn, you update your CV, don't pay anything. Or Spotify, you listen to a certain song without the flexibility of kind of forwarding the song or changing the songs. It's free. But when you want to subscribe more, then there's a premium attached to it. So this kind of a model, we see this as a very aggressive model to go into a market, to go into a competitive market. So if you know JioPhone from India, they came from nowhere to come in and provide a service where the cost of subscribing to their line, voice cost is free of charge, and a lot of people move to the Jio network, and from there on we start to gain market share, and from there on certain services on top of voice like data, certain buy-side and forward are only charged to the customer. So they're doing similar models to the likes of LinkedIn, for example, but mobile subscription basis. So that has a lot of, we see that they are able to go into a market that's very, very competitive and establish a leadership role through this freemium model. The other thing I think will be a disruption is also the banks. Today banks charges you fees or levies in a way to manage your accounts. There's the transaction charges, there's fund charges, and so on. With online banking, all that a lot of online banking services, all that products are waived, right? So that means that a lot of consumer that doesn't want just one basic service of a bank move into a more this kind of a digital banking platform rather than your usual bank that you have. And you see that companies or these financial institutions in Europe has successfully rolled out digital banking. Because of that, there is no consumer doesn't pay a fee and so on. And from banking to mobile phone to this kind of a subscription, we see that they were going to move a lot more to a more mainstream, especially data. So data providers will say, if you want certain data, it is free, but you want something that has more intelligent or more analytical applied to it, there's a certain fee. And I think that would change the way companies go to market. And again, this has when a company goes into this market, it provides this kind of model. One of the important requirement is to understand the population data. So countries that provide this would attract that kind of investors to come in moving forward. I'm on the last two slides. I'm just in 3 minutes late. Quickly, okay. Today there's also this model where the pool is from online to offline. Meaning, companies' products are reaching out online to move to offline. So it is in a way it's a commerce model that entice customers from an online space to a physical store. And I think why I included this in is because, as we move out of lockdowns, I think these are one of the key retail model that the big retailers, the mall operators will have to look at very closely in terms of getting back the foot traffic back into malls and so on. My last slide. Again, I wanted to talk about circular economy in the new model, because we see that, especially if you take into account Gen Z or Generation Z, they will demand this approach by producers, by manufacturers, by all companies. So investors are also looking at this very closely in terms of their decision to invest. So, because at the end of the day, their customers will look into this as well. So today, I'll give you an example. When you buy a processed food, we'll be looking at the packaging and looking at the ingredient, whether the ingredient has things like MSG, whether it's coloring, or things that is not deemed healthy. In the near future, not talking about 10 years, but in a few years' time, it will be the same with how you look at products. When you look at to your decision to purchase a product, you want to look at how circular is this particular product. Is it being is part of the supply chain being imported from different parts of the world that has therefore contributed to pollution, for example. So consumers are very much aware in terms of what they consume and how impactful is their consumption to the environment. And I think when a country or a region have this kind of infrastructure to support circular economy, I think that will give them an edge over the other regions. But this can be done in a more effective way through a digital ecosystem where it is easily being, for example, there's a track and trace component to it. There's point of origin track to it, and so on. So with that, I've kind of talked to you about an hour. That's the time given to me. I don't know whether I have time for Q&A. I leave it to the MC of the day. Cik Hasrul, I think I've kind of spoken a bit too long. I planned for 45 minutes, but unfortunately it's 1 hour.
Okay, thank you, Cik Hazmi. Look like you covered a whole hour with a lot of information, a wide perspective on the key development trends happening and shaping Digital ASEAN. Fantastic insights, I believe, on how we consumers, maybe from consumers up to the government level, can leverage on these ideas. And I think in the past 20 minutes, you've already answered about 4 or 5 of the questions that were already sent behind the scenes. No issues. We don't have more time for you to answer any questions. Thank you so much for your participation. I think the admin will come back to you if there are any specific questions you can ask. But maybe everyone out there, you can look and ponder based on Mr. Hazmi's presentation today. Is Malaysia on track to be the heart of Digital ASEAN? All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jasmine. Okay, to everyone else. Okay, you will be joining in the next presentation. So make sure you click join, and we'll be right back with the session with Zulaira from TPM. Okay.